Hello everybody, and welcome to a new video. Today I'm going to be talking about my digital illustration process. So generally, when I get an idea for a piece, I sketch in my sketchbook something, and then I'm like, oh, that actually looks pretty good. And then I'll grab a bunch of references. I essentially create a mood board after I have found what it is I want to sketch out, or I want to create into like an actual illustration. Usually speaking, the sketch comes before the gathering of references, but for this particular piece I actually just started grabbing references, and I sketched out a thumbnail for what I want this piece to look like. My process for digital illustration tends to be pretty fluid. If I were to split up the way I did digital illustration, I would split it up like this. One category where it's sketching, and the other category would be coloring. Sketching includes like things like from base sketch to like base fucking scribbles to like full on like articulated fucking line art. I'm not much of a line art fan, but there are some cases where line art is kind of useful and necessary. And coloring includes from base colors to like full on rendering, right? Now, if you break things up, you can have a spectrum of loose sketch to all the way to like full on line art, and loose colors all the way to full on rendering. It really depends on what you were using the digital illustration for. So if you're, let's say, drawing frames in an animation, you'd probably want to have more of a structured approach, because you can't fucking draw like 24 rendered pieces per second, right? The way to make it easier on yourself is to add more structure. So that's why you'll typically see digital animators be really good at line art, right? When you make good line art, it also translates well to placing down colors and also placing down shadows where you want them to, and not being very indecisive about that. It requires decisiveness and making a quick decision. But for the purposes of making one digital illustration, it gives you more freedom to experiment and be less decisive and, yeah, be, like, more experimentative. That's the camp I fall into. I really like experimenting when it comes to making digital art. So more of my skill is, I'd say, in the rendering side of the digital art spectrum as opposed to the line art side. Now that we've covered the overview of creating a digital illustration, why don't we just move on to actually illustrating? For this particular piece, I referenced a lot of Vladimir Mozart. A lot of his pieces take place during dawn, and it adds for a very like surreal, dreamlike aesthetic where like the world is kind of like half asleep and half awake. I also mainly referenced them because they had a lot of landscapes, and I wanted this piece to have landscapes. So this piece was very much inspired by his work. So I start off by creating a sketch that maps out the specific composition that I want for this piece. So this includes things like the horizon, the character, and also the giant orb in the background, the giant like space satellite planet thingy in the background. Those are the main signifying things in the piece, right? And then I'll move on to a more refined sketch. For this refined sketch, I'm mainly focusing on the character in the foreground. I really like the third eye motif. That's pretty prevalent in a lot of the pieces I do. So now I'm focusing on the hair. I'm focusing on confident lines when doing the line art / sketch thing, although it's not really line art because it's like not good line art. I like to say that I don't do line art because I'm kind of above that, and it's totally not because I'm like terrible at line art or anything like that. Like, anyways, mainly focusing on like nice flowy lines for the hair, because, you know, like the hair is being affected by the wind because it's like very windy, because it's dawn, and windiness adds to the dreamlike aesthetic, right? Predominantly what I'm focusing on, if I were to like sum it up, is that I'm focusing on adding clothes, like adding interesting clothing items or like accessories, or like arm position, like any like anatomical positions of how I want the character to look. I wanted this character to be kind of like this ethereal, perfect being, but also kind of have like a evil and dastardly side to them. I'm evil. You're in my world now. Yeah, so, like, you'll see me a lot here breaking down the anatomical structure into, like, boxes. That's mainly to help me visualize the figure of this character in a 3D space. Simplifying things into boxes and cylinders helps me with that. Also helps a lot of people with that. So, it's a pretty good technique. Right now I'm experimenting with the hands and shit, and like, it's just like not working out. So I just fucking cropped them because honestly I could not be bothered to deal with that crap. So now we begin the coloring. Alright, so the color palette I'm going for this is I'm mainly using desaturated colors and also like colors that don't have much a value variation right now in the beginning stage. This will allow me to add more saturation and contrast in the future. Honestly, I feel like I could work more on adding interesting colors. I feel that experimenting with colors is easier when you have a good foundational understanding of how values work, but I do think like having a lot of interesting colors obviously adds a lot to the piece, but adding a lot of interesting colors may sometimes be doing too much. So I usually go on the side of adding as less color as possible I can get away with while still making the piece look colorful or not just completely fucking black and white, right? Or monochrome. So in order for the red eyes of the character to feel less jarring, I kind of added a bit of more red to the face and also like the edges of the background. I think taking one point of color and sort of spreading it around the piece sort of adds a better cohesiveness with the color scheme or color palette of the piece. When I start rendering, I typically start with the face. Since this piece takes place in dawn, the shadows will be a bit softer and there won't be much hard light. So the shadows will not have like defined edges, they'll be more soft. So after I render a bit, I will start messing with the levels of the piece and also the color balance. This basically acts as me introducing more colors into the piece and also more contrast. Now, I know what you might be asking. Why does your character not have a nose, bro? And honestly, I just could not be bothered to draw the nose, man. Like, I was experimenting with it, and I was like, does adding a nose really, like, add to the piece? I don't know. I kind of like that stylization of not adding the nose. I promise it's not because I, like, don't know how to draw noses or anything like that, but anyways. So this is, like, my first time, like, really using a sort of landscape. I have, like, experimented with landscapes before, but, you know, I gotta say, I'm not that I'm not that experienced with drawing landscapes. So this is a pretty good piece for me to learn that. This might be something that I learn more in the future, I don't know. But when it comes to rendering landscapes, there's sometimes, like, I get to a point where it's like, okay, how much more should I add? Like, and I guess by extension, this kind of happens, like, with all my pieces. I kind of get to a point where I'm just like, man, I could add more, but what would it really add to the piece to add more here, right? Sometimes when it comes to rendering, a lot of what makes good rendering is not adding so much detail to every single inch of the piece. You have to really know where to add detail and where to obscure things. But with backgrounds, I don't really know how to differentiate what's important in a landscape and what's not important in a landscape. So that's something I'm going to have to study how certain painters will abstract things in the background and also what they will add detail to in their landscapes. And here I'm adding like a bit of an outline to the character and the clouds to sort of make them pop out more. This is something I'll typically do after I've like been like rendered as much as I can and I'm kind of at a loss for like, I don't know what to add. So like I typically default to, you know what, I'll add an outline into the character because it makes things sort of pop out and feel more finished, right? I also added a bit of an outline on the cloud to make it look more stylized. I find that whenever I add like outlines like that, it gives a sort of line art. You get the benefits of line art while also keeping that painterly style, and it makes things look stylized while also keeping the painterly aesthetic. I feel like that kind of defines my art style. So after I'm done with the full rendering process, I mean, you can never be fully done with rendering, but after I've just been like, okay, I've had enough of this piece, then I'll start messing with post-processing. I'll recommend a video by Cynix. Cynix has a really good video on the basics of post-processing, and I typically follow that video when it comes to post-processing. So I'll open Photoshop and I'll mess with stuff like auto-tone and auto-contrast, and for this particular piece I didn't really like the outcome of auto-tone because I feel like I kind of lost that desaturated, like, old painting, like, because I liked the green over hue on it. It made it look like an old picture, right? Or like a dream. It made it look more dreamlike, but the auto-tone kind of conflicted with that. I did do a bit of auto contrast and just created a new layer and changed the opacity of that so it wouldn't be that contrasty, just to sort of make things pop out more while also balancing the dreamlike aesthetic that I like. But yeah, when it comes to post-processing, it's definitely very easy to overdo it and conflict with the original vibe you imagined for how you wanted this piece to look. So what I do is I experiment around with what post-processing thing can I add to this piece that adds to the intention of the piece. So I did add a high pass overlay, and I also experimented with like a lot of the other different settings for, like, instead of overlay I used fucking like the difference divide or whatever it's called. I did try to add a chromatic aberration, but I didn't really like the result, so I kind of fucking X'd that out and moved on to adding a slight amount of noise. I think adding noise to digital art really makes it look more, it adds that like nice grit to it that makes it look less painfully digital. So yeah, that's like my post-processing process. My post-processing process that I process through process called post-processing process anyways.
And so yeah, this is the final piece. Thank you so much for sticking to the end of the video. If you guys have any questions or anything you'd like me to talk about, leave a comment below. And if you enjoyed the video, consider subscribing. I am a new channel, so your support would be much appreciated. With that all out of the way, I guess I'll see you in the next video. Bye!